Hey everyone, I'm Scott Brandley.
And I'm Alicia Coakley. Every member of the church has a story to share, one that can instill faith, invite growth, and inspire others.
On today's episode, we're going to hear how one man's path to healing after losing two sons to suicide is reminding him that the Lord is aware of us in our hours of need. Welcome to Latter-day Lights. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Latter-day Lights. We're so glad that you're here with us today. And we have a special guest, Eldon Buchanan, for his third visit on Latter-day Lights. We're so glad you're here with us, Eldon.
Thank you. I didn't have any plans of being on for the third time, but events in my life come about that I have some more things I would like to share.
Yeah, Eldon, you just, we're just getting started, and I'm already starting to feel emotional because you have just been on Scott and I's heart and mind, and just like the things that you're going to discuss today, the things that you've gone through already, and that you continue to go through. You're just such an inspiration to us, and so you are our most visited guest, like our.
Oh yeah, and I assure you, this is the last one. I'm not going to have a fourth one.
Yeah. And if we do have a fourth one with you, Eldon, let's make it all just miraculous awesomeness, and
let's make it a happy party.
Just wonderful and big and happy, and that's what gosh. But I love that you're willing to come on here and that you took the time to really wait until you were ready to share it, because I think that's really, really important. And I don't know. I love that I know you, and I love that you're our friend and that you're here today, because I think that a lot of people are going to be able to get a lot out of your story. So thank you for joining us again.
That's kind of you saying thank you.
Yeah. So why don't you give everybody a little reminder of what you do for a living, a little bit about you and your family.
All right. As was said, I'm Eldon Buchanan, and in 2 months, I'm going to turn 67, and I think, how in the world did that happen? So I guess your only option is either die or keep aging. And so anyway, it comes quicker than you think, but I'm still in good shape,
True.
I feel like. But I grew up on a dairy farm up in Meridian, Idaho, and in my first story, I talked about the death of my father and that. And anyway, that's where I got agriculture in my blood. And so in 1984, I was able to start my dairy farming career, and then we moved to Smithfield. And we were there for 33 years, and our dairy was known as Buchanan Dairy. So it was a family affair, and so that came to an end in 2018. And these last several years, I've been transporting trailers around the country and so forth. I'm still doing that, but kind of at a slower pace.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And you have a new wife, Denise, right?
Yes.
Yep. And she's awesome.
Yeah, she is.
We love Denise. She's great. And then you have how many kids do you guys have?
Well, Leslie and I had 4 children. We had 2 sons and then 2 daughters.
Gotcha.
And now we've just got 2 daughters left.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, we're going to go ahead and turn the time over to you and let you kind of fill us in. I know the last time that you shared about your dad, you shared about the loss of your son, Curtis, when he was, how old was he? 14?
No, he was 11. He was about
11.
a month and a half from turning 12.
That's right. He was really, really young when he unfortunately, passed away from suicide. And so you went through that. And do you want to kind of just give everyone just a little recap starting from there, and then let us know where you're.
Well, if I can just give a little quick recap of 1 and 2, my stories there. And
Sure.
So on my first one, I talked about my growing up years. My mother struggled with alcoholism when I was younger, and then she, fortunately, when I was 14, she was able to overcome that, and we had a blissful family life. I'm grateful that I had those 4 years of such a happy time in our family. But then my father died of a heart attack at the age of 51, and anyway, that was a hard time in my life. And I struggled there. And fortunately, as I share these things, it's been easy for me to see where God is of me and us in our lives. So in the summer of 78, I was blessed to meet a wonderful woman by the name of Leslie Rowley. She was a blessing in my life, and I'll always be grateful for that. We had 39 years of marriage. We had 4 children together. Now we have 10 grandchildren, and we were able to start our dairy farm business. And anyway, then in the second episode, I talked about how we got into financial problems on the farm, and that was in 2008. And I went long haul trucking in an effort to keep the farm going, which, I went out with pure intent. But over a 9-year period living out there on the road by myself in a truck, and then the advent of new technology led me down a road that I will forever regret. When I was on the road trucking, I'd listened to a lot of books on tape, and I'd listened to one by Elder Maxwell, Neil A. Maxwell. And in that book, he talks about how us as humans sometimes willingly impale ourselves upon the bed of afflictions. And that's exactly what I did to myself. And I don't even understand why I would have done such a thing. But we're free to choose our choices, but we're not free with the consequences that follow. It cost me my marriage of 39 years, cost me my church membership, cost me my farm, cost me relationships. And I've experienced pain in my life. But it was during that time, and still I carry pain in my heart over all that. But I have never anguished as bad like I have then, like I talked about my own struggles with depression, thoughts of suicide. I remember first time I thought of in my own life, I was about 18 years old. It was after the death of my father. And so I've had that struggle for 50 years now, that I've struggled with depression, thoughts of suicide. Over the years, I have sought help for that. And there was one time, it was in 2018, that's when I was hauling RV trailers, and I had gone up into Alberta, Canada, up there to Cardston, close by where you grew up, Scott. And I wanted to see the Cardston Temple. I'd never been there. So I drove over there. And this was after Leslie told me she wanted a divorce and moved out. And I sat there and I was on the west side of the temple, and I was looking at it. And I began to weep and what, the temple stands for, things of eternal nature. And then when I drove around on the south side, I was sitting there crying. And like I said, I've never felt such anguish, sorrow, and remorse in my life. And, I was feeling the weight of sin, my actions, and loss of my marriage, church membership, everything. And as I was sitting there, it was just like, I don't know, just kind of opened up to me, gave me a tiny insight what it must have been like for our Savior Jesus Christ when he was in Gethsemane and on the cross, what it must have even been like for him, because what I was dealing with was literally crushing me. So it gave me more insight and thought, or, gratitude for our Savior Jesus Christ. Then so I tell about, I decided I need to get away. And so that's when I hooked onto my camp trailer and drove to Alaska. And I just wanted that alone time to be with God and to myself. And the funny thing is, and this is where I, in spite of, our sins or whatever we do, I've come to know that Christ or God our Father is always aware of us. And so when I went up to Alaska in 3 months, I did not even have this on my radar, but I returned home with this cute blonde by the name of Denise. and I didn't meet her in Alaska. And she has been a blessing in my life, enormous blessing. It's not every man that can say that they've had two wonderful women bless their lives that I have with Leslie and Denise. They've both been wonderful blessings in my life. Anyway, so that I think that's about wraps up those past two podcasts. And Scott, when I was listening to your podcast, when you're talking just this last week, you talked about, some of these experiences that come into our lives. They're not necessarily meant just to be kept to ourselves. Right. It really doesn't benefit anyone if we don't share them. So, I've always bore my testimony, and the testimony I have of our Savior, Jesus Christ. But anyway, so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to share this experience that taught me even more. So so let's start on with the story with Bryce. I need to back up just a little bit. Yesterday, I went up to the Boise, Idaho area to be with my nephew, Chris, who's like a son to me. Things were hard for Chris, so he came to live with us when he was 17. And Chris and Bryce became just like brothers. So I went up yesterday and spent some time with him. I had him take me over to see his dad's grave there in Boise. And we sat there, and I let Chris just talk about whatever he wanted to. And he was very open and honest with me about things. After he was done, I told him, I said, Chris, you're in a very good spot, or a beautiful spot, because it's in these deep trials of our lives is when we can truly come to have a relationship with our Savior, Jesus Christ, in a way that perhaps no other way brings that about for us. And so that's what I shared with him. And so then that's the foundation I want to build upon on this story, how God is indeed aware of us. So my son, Bryce, before I got on here, I had a good cry, and so I hope that I can keep my emotions in check. But when Curtis died, he was a month and a half from turning 12, but he was 11. And Bryce was a 7-year-old boy, and Andrea was 5, and Melanie was 2.5 weeks old. And, that I've thought about that. It pains me to think that Leslie and I are our complete family, that here in this mortal sphere, we only had for 2.5 weeks. Because, after Curtis died, Melanie was only 2.5 weeks old. So anyway, Bryce was 7, and I kept him very close to me. And we developed a very beautiful father-son relationship. We had a close relationship. I loved having Bryce work with me. And anyway, it was about 2 years ago, I ran into Bryce up at the car wash in Smithfield. And we started talking, and the subject of Curtis came up. And Bryce just broke into sobs. I've never seen a grown man sob like he was sobbing, literally just sobbing. And I just sit there and put my arm around him as he cried. And I'm grateful that I was there to witness that, because I was able to see just how deep that pain was in him over the death of his brother, Curtis. So anyway, but even with that, the last time I saw Bryce, in fact, he passed away on March 29th of last year. But it's been 2 years since I've seen him. It was 2 years ago this month that I had saw him, and it didn't end well. And so that at least I sent him a text letting him know that I loved him. But anyway, so I had not seen Bryce for 10 months. And, there were some things that, took place in Bryce's life that, he struggled with a lot. He struggled with depression. He struggled with numerous things in his life that weren't going like he wanted them to go. And on March 29th of last year, I had got home late the night before, and then I had to get up. I got up about 9 o'clock that morning. It was Friday. and I was going to go up to Preston to get another trailer. And I saw that I had missed 2 calls from my daughter, Andrea, and 2 calls from a different individual. So that raised the alarm on me a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I went out and fed the horses before I left. And as I was standing out there by the road, I saw a sheriff's truck drive by out on the main road. And then he came around. So that concerned me. He came around, drove in there and asked me if I was Bryce's father. I said, yes. He wanted to know if I had seen Bryce. And I said, no. And they were concerned about him. They didn't know where he was at. He hadn't gone to work. And anyway, so I called my daughter, Andrea, and was on the phone with her. And, I thought, like Bryce, like his father, just need to get away for a little bit and blow off some steam. And, But anyway, so I had started going up towards Preston. I got up to Richmond, and I was on the phone with Andrew back and forth. And I'll never forget, Andrew began just screaming and tell me that he'd been found and he was dead of a gunshot wound. And I just had to, I began to physically shake, and I had to pull off the side of the road, off onto another road. And Andrea was concerned with me, with my struggles, the same demon. And she said, Dad, you've got to hang in there. And so I promised her I would. So I pulled off, the side of the road as I trying to wrap my brain around this. I did not know how to process the death of my son, Bryce. I dearly love Bryce. Anyway, as I sat there, I called Denise, and she didn't answer. And I had talked to Andrea, and I promised her that I wouldn't do anything foolish. But as I sat there, I did not know who exactly to turn to. Leslie and I being Bryce's parents, I didn't have that option to turn to Leslie anymore. And I just didn't know what to do. And anyway, so I probably could have handled this better, but I didn't. But I was dealing with a major crisis in my life. Like I said, I didn't know how to process the death of my second son, Bryce. I seriously thought about going into my life and joining my 2 sons, but I knew I couldn't do that. In fact, I need to throw this in. I was up to standing at the graves of my 2 sons just recently, and I told them, I said, Curtis and Bryce, you robbed your father of this. I was supposed to have been the one that was dead of suicide and buried, not both of my sons. And anyway, but so I decided people handle grief different. I'm one that prefers to be alone. And anyway, I didn't talk to Denise, and then so I just sent her a text telling her that Bryce was dead. I decided to go out by Mount Borah out in Idaho, and we'll get to that story a little later, about Mount Borah, but it's out there north of Arco, Idaho. And so I sent a text to Denise and to my daughters, told them please not worry about me, but I just needed some time. So I turned off my phone for 2.5 days. And I drove out there towards Mount Borah, and I drove up as close or high as I could to the base of the mountain. And I knew I couldn't get to the top. There's too much snow, but I wanted to climb up to a mountaintop. And Denise, I'm glad I remembered this. Denise, every morning, she gets up and reads the scriptures. And after I've shared the story about me climbing Mount Borah, a man asked me, I shared my testimony, and he said, why'd you feel the need to climb a mountain? And so Denise came across this in her scripture study, and she shared it with me, and it's out of Nephi somewhere. And it came to pass that after I, Nephi, had been in the land of Bountiful for the space of many days, the voice of the Lord came unto me, saying, Arise and get thee into the mountain. And it came to pass that I arose and went up into the mountain and cried unto the Lord. And then it says, just a quick comment about some possible symbolisms going into the mountain. To commune with the Lord, it requires effort to climb up the mountain. Similarly, it requires effort for us to live worthy of inspiration and guidance from God. Symbolically, climbing up into a mountain could also represent drawing closer to heaven or closer to God. So anyway, for whatever reason, I felt the need to be in the mountains. And so I climbed up as high as I could. I climbed up to a mountain peak that was lower than the rest and just poured out my heart to God and asked for strength to help me endure this. I couldn't even hardly comprehend how this could have even happened. And anyway, so, in my second episode, I talked about some of the problems I dealt with and, the time I laid on top of a mountain about froze to death. Mm-hmm. Thought the same thing. I thought, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to just spend the night on the mountain. I crawled under this log. When it started to get dark, I began to shiver. And I thought, Eldon, this is stupid. All you're doing is torturing yourself. So I didn't have any light. So I tried to find my way back down off the mountain in the dark. And I finally made it back to my pickup. And I just spent that night and the next day there in my pickup and walking around, just trying to absorb this. I just couldn't understand or even grasp my mind around the death of my son, Bryce. How do you put your mind around that both of your sons have died of suicide 32 years apart of each other? Anyway, so then I like I said, I shut off my phone. I didn't even have a signal. So I decided to drive back down where I had a signal, and I sent a text to Denise just telling her I was okay, not to worry about me. And then I turned off my phone. And Denise, I think she said she contacted the police or something. They pinged my phone, and I was out by Arco, Idaho. But then I drove out to the desert further out there and spent Saturday night out there. And I remember going for a walk off in the desert to a small hill. And I just wailed. I just couldn't understand how my son Bryce was dead. And I just prayed to the Lord. And then I came back and I laid on the toolbox in my truck and just stared up at the stars in the heavens. And that brought me a little comfort. But I knew that I finally had to go home. I had to face the music. So Sunday, I knew that I had to go home. So I planned on heading back home. And so I got back home, and then we had to plan for Bryce's funeral. And then that was another painful experience. But anyway, we got through the funeral, and but my daughter Melanie suggested that I build a memorial here at our place, and so which I did, and it became there's a picture of it that you'll be able to see, and anyway, there's a picture of both mine and Leslie's two sons, Curtis and Bryce, hanging there, pictures of them. Then there's pictures of Andrew and Melanie. And that's, wanted to build this memorial. Before Bryce even died, I had been out I had to take a trailer to California. And on my way back, I broke down by Battle Mountain, Nevada. You know where that is, I'm sure, Alicia. Hey. So while I spent waiting for somebody to come and help me, I walked over towards the mountain. I was out there for 3 or 4 hours, and I found some beautiful rocks that were quite beautiful. And anyway, I gathered up some small ones to bring home to give to my grandchildren. And so I had an experience after Bryce died. I wanted to go out there and gather up some of these bigger rocks. But it was dark by the time I got there. And so I I drove up the mountain a little ways, and all I had was the headlights from my truck. And as I was going up the mountain a ways, there was something that stopped me. And I got out to see what it was, and there was this rock that had flipped up. It was too dark for me to see where I'd originally gotten these rocks. So this rock that stopped me, as I got out there looking around, there were all these beautiful rocks that I could see surrounding me. And I thought perhaps that's why I was stopped there. So I started to gather up these rocks, and I finally uncovered a big rock. I mean, it was huge. And I said, I'm not going home without it. I'd loaded all the other rocks, but it was so big and so heavy, I could not lift it in the back of my truck. And I tried numerous times. And I felt like Bryce was out there with me that night. I talked to Bryce while I was loading these rocks and different things. So I told Bryce, I said, I need your help to load this rock, Bryce, to take home to put on this memorial for you and Curtis. So I tried one more time, and I still couldn't get it in the back of the truck. So then I said, Bryce, let's do this together. And then after I said that, I was able to get the rock in the back of the truck. I mean, Bryce was a big, strong man, but anyway, I feel like that was kind of a tender mercy. And so anyway, I got that memorial built. And now to move on to Mount Borah. I talked about it a little bit in my second episode. Anyway, Mount Borah is the highest peak in my native state of Idaho. It's north of Arco, Idaho, up by Mackay, Idaho. And I had climbed it once as a 16-year-old Boy Scout. And anyway, for whatever reason, I had a desire to climb it again. It was after that experience I had out in Malta, Idaho. When I was out there in that place, when I came home, I wanted to climb the mountain. And that never happened until after I married Denise, and I still felt the need to climb it. One day, it was in June of 2019, I decided I was going to go climb Mount Borah. And steep, it gains altitude to over 5,000 feet in 4.5 miles, I think.
Wow.
But anyway, as I started up there, not real well prepared, I just carried a bottle of water with me. But I finally made it up to the top that was close to the top of the mountain, but it had too much snow on the top there to make it up to the top. So I told Denise and others that I'd made it to the top, but I actually hadn't. I took pictures from there. It looked like I was on top of the world, but I actually had not made it to the top. So that desire did not leave me. And so then I was coming back from Oregon one day, and I stopped in Meridian to pay respects to at my parents' grave. And it was June 24th of 2023 as I was standing there, and that would have been my father's 99th birthday had he lived. Wow. So I thought, well, I'm going to go climb Mount Borah. It was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. I thought I'm going to go climb it in honor of my father. So I went off and I got there to Mount Borah later that day. And so I climbed up there and I spent the night up above this tree line. There's a place called Chicken Out Ridge. You've got to crawl across it and you don't want to fall off either side of your toes. And I was starting to feel the effects of that high altitude, and I was feeling shaky and dizzy, and so I didn't dare go across that. So I fired my pistol in the air 6 times in honor of my dad's, what would have been his 99th birthday. But that desire would still not go away, that I wanted to get back to the top again. So I didn't make it that time. And then it was after Bryce died. It was in August, August 24th, I believe. And at this time, I told Denise I was going to go and that I needed to do this. And so the other times I'd been there was in June, and there was still too much snow. So this was in August, a better time if you wanted to climb to the top. So I went more prepared this time. And I took a pack, and I offered a prayer. to God that I could feel my two sons with me on this father and son journey, as well as my father, because it would have been my father's 100th birthday at that time. So I prayed that I might have that blessing. So I got up there to Mount Borah. It was towards evening, 5 o'clock or so. And so I started to hike up the trail again, which is, through the trees and stuff. But after you get up above the tree line, there's a place that I had, laid down and rested before. And anyway, as it got dark, as I was stopped and looking at the stars, there was 3 stars brighter than the rest. Should have a picture of it. And there was one that was further out, and then there was 2 back behind just a little ways. And I thought perhaps that represented my father and my 2 sons that were there with me. So then I stopped there and slept for a little bit. And then as soon as it got light, I started heading towards the top of the mountain. So then I was able to get back to that spot that I'd been to previously, where I had taken those pictures and said that I'd made it to the top of the mountain. And I thought at that point, I was just exhausted. I thought it was still quite a ways to the top, but this time I could make it because there wasn't any snow. And at first I thought, maybe I'll just call it good, say that I've made it close to the top. But I said, no, Eldon, you came here to climb it with your father and sons, and you need to do that. So I set out for the top of Mount Borah. The elevation's 12,662. I believe there's a picture of me at the top. But as I set out there, I could see some people gain ground on me, and they caught up to me. And anyway, there was a girl from Florida. She was in her early 30s, and then another young man that was, in his late 20s. And I visited with them, and I told them that I was 66. They were half my age, and I said, I'm up here trying to climb this at this age, which they were impressed by. But anyway, there was other hikers up there, but most of them were half my age. So those 2 got ahead of me and got up to the top 5 minutes before I did. As soon as I got up there, we congratulated each other. And, the one gal made a sign for us to hold up, at the top of Mount Borah, which I did. And so as we were up there on the top, there's a book that you can sign. And so each of these 2 signed the book, and then they handed it over to me. And I was writing in there for a little while. They probably wondered what I was doing. Anyway, I said, I assume you 2 climbed it for a very different reason than what I did. And I told them why I was climbing it. I said I was climbing it because in honor of my 2 sons that have both taken their lives, and then my father. And then it was probably 2 o'clock, and it was getting a little later, still quite a ways back down. So they asked me if I was ready to go. And I said, no, I'm going to stay up here for a little while, and thanked them for that. And so they went on their way. While I was up there, I knelt in prayer, pleaded to God for numerous things. Well, towards the end of my prayer, I asked the Lord if he would bless me with a gift to take down off of the mountain for my efforts for, climbing up there. I thanked him that I was able to feel my father and my 2 sons with me, but I just asked for it, that I might have a gift to take back off the mountain for my efforts climbing it. And I left it at that. I didn't ask for anything specific. Anyway, so I started my way back down, and about halfway up, I had brought my pack, and I got rid of it because I thought I could never get to the top carrying this pack. But once I got back down to my pack, I was able to rest, and it was getting later in the evening. So then I got headed back down. I thought my goal was to go back to this place I'd stayed just above the tree line. So I made it back down there, and it was dark by the time I got there, and I thought, well, I'll just lay down here and try to go to sleep until I got light, then finish my journey in the morning down the rest of the mountain. And I laid there for probably a half an hour, and I couldn't sleep. And I thought, I might as well just keep walking instead of just laying here. So I put on my pack and started down, and numerous times when I'd get tired and fatigued, I'd just lay down on the trail there and just rest for a little bit. It was at 12:42 a.m. I had stopped and I just laid down there and looking up at the stars. And I was just getting ready to leave, and I was looking over to the west, the sky, the western sky. And it began to look different. It started to turn green a little bit. And as I sat there and watched this, then all of a sudden, these beautiful red lights. I mean, it was the northern lights that came. And I sat there and wept. I mean, and realized this is the gift that I'd asked for. These northern lights, there's beautiful pictures of it. And then, there's one that shows me where I was on the trail when I took those pictures. But I was just, as you'll see from the pictures, how beautiful that was. But I was just so touched that the Lord was mindful of me and sent that tender mercy to me. So anyway, I was, when I shared that with my daughters and others, the people were in awe about that. But then, so then we had another very beautiful tender mercy. It was on New Year's Day, and I had hoped that this new year would be better than this past one. At about 4:00, Denise and I met Andrea and Melanie and their families up to the grave, particularly of Bryce, because we were honoring him, because the following day he would have turned 40 years old. And so we were there in honor, put some balloons, and we're there in honor of Bryce, paying honor to him. And as we were standing there, it began to lightly snow. You feel it get colder. And all of a sudden, these beautiful snowflakes began to fall upon us. And I mean, just beautiful. And you'll see pictures. I mean, they look like they're not even real. They're so perfect. And as we stood there, we were just literally in awe of all these beautiful snowflakes falling on us. And then what became even more interesting to me, so after I researched snowflakes a little bit, it said it takes an hour from where a snowflake is created up in the sky, wherever. It takes an hour for that snowflake to fall to earth. And then it said this perfect six-sided snowflake is very rare to see. And they're only like one in every thousand of snowflakes, this perfect snowflake. Yet we had hundreds of them falling upon us as we sat there. And we were just literally all in awe. I mean, the chances of that happening while we were standing there at the graves of Curtis and Bryce, the chances of winning the lottery were greater than that happening right there as we happened to be standing there. Wow. And anyway, that was a beautiful experience for all of us. Brings us up to about, now, but there, in closing, there's one experience I want to close with. So, I have my little farm out here and I have a couple of horses, and I made our barnyard is close to the main road that goes through, and I put a pathway there for people to go coming to from church or wherever, so they don't have to go clear down to the corner. Then I've got at the end there, it says a gate that says welcome to Buchanan Lane. And so people feel free to come in there. There's a lot of people on the outside that like to see the horses and stuff. So I got home one evening and I drove back there, and there was some young father with his little boy standing back there petting the horses, looking at him. And I didn't know who it was. So as I got out to visit with him, he told me that he was from New York City and that his wife was from Connecticut, and they'd come out here to go to school. And so as I visited with him, he came out and told me, he said, "I'm not a Mormon." I said, "Well, that's fine." But then I always enjoy talking to people that are not members of the church, how they feel like they've been treated or, accepted moving into a dominant LDS community. Right. We talked about that just a little bit, and he told me that. Then he came out and told me that he was an atheist. And I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, come here. So I took him over and showed him this memorial that I'd built and showed him my two sons there. And I said, it's been through the death of my two sons and the trials that I've experienced in life is how I've truly come to know and have a testimony of our Savior Jesus Christ. And it's funny, I was ward missionary at the time, and it's funny that the missionaries came walking by out by the road, and I hollered at them, told them to come over, and they visited with him and, took his information. And so we'll see where that goes. But anyway, I think that's about concludes this third episode.
Oh, Eldon. Oh my gosh. It's so hard and heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. And I can feel like even just a difference in the first time that you came on and you shared about Curtis and your dad to the second time, to the third time now. Like, I feel like you have this, I don't know, strength about you, even just in the short, between the first episode and the third episode now. You have this like very solid strength about you and your testimony where like, you can see it, like you can feel it, like your pain is still very much there, but the amount of faith that you have in the Lord still, despite all of this, is so like, I don't even have like a word for it. I don't know how to explain it, Eldon, but you're just.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I forgot an experience that I wanted to add to this. So it was a couple of years ago when I was out, when I was hauling RV trailers. I'd gone back to Indiana to get a trailer, and I was coming back with it. And I was out in the middle of Wyoming on this particular day, and I had forgot to put up my DOT stickers on the windows on my truck. So anyway, while I was out there, the state trooper came up alongside me, and then he backs off and gets behind me and turns on his lights. And I thought, oh, great. And I knew why he was pulling me over, for not having my DOT stickers as a commercial driver. But as we, he came around on the side over in more in the borrow pit, and we started to visit. I had a very lengthy, good visit with this state trooper. He was probably, I don't know, in his late 40s, 50s. And he told me that he had lost his father a few years ago, and told me how hard that was, losing his father. And he said the thing that about did him in. He told me, well, it'd been a year prior to when I was standing there visiting with him. He said he was dispatched on a fatality. And he said I was stopped halfway there because that fatality was my daughter. And then so after we talked about that, I said, do you believe that you'll see your daughter and your father again? He said, when my daughter was killed, that's when I quit believing in God. And I said, well, I can relate to you on both counts. I told him about the death of my father when I was a teenager. And I told him that, that I experienced what bitterness was like. Then I shared with him about the loss of Curtis as a 34-year-old father and how difficult that was. But I told him, as painful as that was, that became perhaps the most beautiful experience of my life, simply because I came to truly know of the Savior Jesus Christ through that. So I've had that, from that experience on, that is what has kept me anchored to, because I have known that God is aware of us without a doubt. So that's what has sustained me. If I didn't have that, I don't know if I would have made it through some of this stuff.
Oh, yeah. I don't see how anyone could have, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, to think there's people out there, like maybe this officer or other people that when real difficult tragedies happen, they become jaded and they curse God. They lose their faith.
Oh, without a doubt.
And so you're actually, everything that you've gone through, I can't think of anyone that I personally know that's gone through more than you.
Yeah. I agree.
And I agree with Alicia. Like it feels like you have this quiet confidence in God, this faith that I feel it more now on this episode than I have in the past. And even after you've lost your second son, and I don't know how to explain it either, Alicia, but I feel the same thing. And thank you for being willing to share it, Eldon. Honestly, it's incredibly hard to have you go through it. We know how painful it is for you to have to relive it and share it, but at the same time, I think there are some mercies, some things that you've been able to get through that can help other people get through difficult things like this too.
Well, and that's why I was willing to share these experiences, because, and hope maybe it helps somebody else. But, as I go out and stand by this memorial I built to my two sons, I still continue to think, how is this even possible? I never thought this kind of thing would ever come into my life. And anyway, you can either become bitter or become, turn to God for solace and help. And
yeah. Can I ask, Eldon, how do you, you mentioned that everybody grieves differently, right? And one of the things that I'm in the process of myself right now is recognizing that, like, not only does every person grieve differently, but we grieve every person differently.
Yes.
I was telling you and Scott earlier that my mom was just given a diagnosis of terminal cancer a couple weeks ago, and originally we thought that we had 12 to 18 months with her, and then the doctor just came back a couple days ago and said it's going to be more like 3 to 6 months now. And so, what was the difference for you between your dad, Curtis, now Bryce? Did you feel like it was each really super unique to each person?
Oh, without a doubt. It was. Suicide is a different angle viewing somebody's death, accepting that. It's one of those things you wouldn't wish upon anyone that has to go through it. But
do you feel like any of the times were easier than others, or was it just different?
No, I wouldn't say they were easier. The thing I talked about, the death of my father when I was 17. That was, and it was all a sudden death. And anyway, the thing that caused me to become bitter there is all of the events that changed our lives forever. You said our mother remarried 7 months later, and we had the farm. And I had envisioned as a young 17-year-old that my life was set in stone, that I was going to be there on the farm with my dad forever, and that didn't come close. So I experienced bitterness through that. And, as like I said, but with Curtis, being that death of our first child, Leslie had just given birth to Melanie on November 5th of 92. On November 22nd, 2.5 weeks later, Curtis dies. That's quite a range of emotions to go through in 2.5 weeks. The birth of a joy of a daughter, and then the death of your oldest child.
Yeah.
And so my cousin told me something, my oldest cousin once, he told me, he'd been a mission president and stuff, and he said let's see if I can get it right. He said the more pain and experiences like we have here gives us greater capacity for joy on the other end. When my time comes to see my father and my two sons, that thought is overwhelming. The joy that will replace the sorrow when that time comes.
Mm-hmm.
Some people wonder, well, is there a next life or not? I've talked to some, they doubt it or, wonder. That's something I have no doubt about. that I will see my two sons again, Curtis and Bryce, as well as my father and my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing I love about the gospel is the idea of having an eternal perspective.
Oh, you have to have that, or if you don't have an eternal perspective, life would get unbearable.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Gosh, Eldon. Well, thank you so much again for coming on here today and for sharing your part 3 with us. Like I said, Scott and I, our hearts just go out to you and your family. And as heartbreaking and hard as it's been, like, I just want you to know, like, we see you and we know that you're going to do every bit of good that you can from every ounce of pain and bad that has happened. And so thank you for being that example to us.
As I was talking to I'll call him my son, Chris, yesterday, as trials come into our lives, we don't just say, oh, I'd love to experience this thing in my life. But when they come into our lives, which they do, all of us, and if we, I was telling Chris, the Lord, these trials, he doesn't necessarily take them from us, but he's with us as we go through them. And it's what we gain and learn through the experience that, and in the end, it's truly our trials that become blessings to us and help to create us who God wants us to be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, Eldon, thank you so much again for all of that. Is there any last message that you'd like to give to our guests? Maybe anyone who might be struggling with their own thoughts of suicide or has a loved one who might be struggling or?
Mental illness and, struggles with depression and all that, that's real. I mean, it's not just something made up. Like I said, I've struggled with it for 50 years of my life. And, I have sought help. To be honest, I've been on an antidepressant for 20 years. And so it was after the death of Bryce. I don't know if you've heard anything about it. I don't know if you've heard about that, ketamine treatments.
I've heard of it.
And so I tried that, and I feel like that has helped. But, I have not yet found just a total cure-all. It's something to deal with. But, and, even Chris, all of us, we knew that Bryce was struggling, but none of us thought that he would ever fully go through with this. Right. I think that just, as he became hopeless is what happened, his life and everything lost hope.
Yeah, life's hard when you lose hope.
Well, it is. It is. You got to have hope, or if you don't have that, it's like you have anything. So that's what Bryce lost. Right.
I know for us, we had, I think I mentioned this, I don't know if it was on your last episode, but when a couple of the other episodes that we had and stuff, I mentioned that we had a moment where we almost lost our son, about a year and a half ago. He almost took his life too. And the one thing that saved him really was, he had his own spiritual promptings and experiences and stuff, but the thing that stopped him was reaching out to someone in that moment. First, he reached out to our bishop, and our bishop didn't answer the phone. And then he reached out to the police department, which just happens to literally be across the park. Like it's our house, a park, and then the police station is right across from us. And he was able to muster just enough courage to make not one, but 2 phone calls until he could get a hold of someone. And I think that honestly is the way that Satan gets us, is he breaks our connection to each other.
Absolutely.
He makes us feel alone, because if we had at least one little connection in that moment, anything at all could be the thing that keeps us here for a little longer, right? That gets us through one more episode, or one more day, or one more month or year, or whatever it is. And so I know for me, one of the things that I've really been trying to focus on since that has happened is being so connected with my son, knowing that he struggles with that all the time. constantly being like someone who is connected to him. And so I think however that looks, right? Like maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's sending little memes to each other. But especially constant reiteration of, I love you. I need you here. I'm so glad that you're where you are. And even when you struggle with stuff, like that super stinks. I hate that you're going through that, but I'm here with you. So let's keep doing life together. I think just keeping that connection is something that could really help save a lot of lives.
So there was an experience that took place that I shared it on my second episode. And so I am anxious to learn more about this or understand it better. When I talked about on my second episode on November 21st of 2017, the night that Leslie told me she wanted a divorce, I thought my life was over. And anyway, so I went home and slept in the trailer, and Bryce was there with me because they were concerned about me. And so I thought I was going to end my life. So I ended up crawling out of the trailer. I couldn't go out the front door because Bryce was there, and went to the house. And then I came back. I didn't have access to a gun. So I was going to just, end my life somehow. And right as I got to leave to go out, it was like 3 a.m. Bryce came out of the trailer. He didn't even know I was outside. Somebody had woke him up. So the Lord used Bryce to intervene in my behalf, but why didn't anyone intervene in his behalf? Yeah. That's something that I'll look forward to understanding better someday.
Yeah.
And it does give us comfort, I think, knowing that we don't have to have the answers in this life because it will all be revealed.
Yeah.
Like it's promised to all be revealed to us in the end. And it'll be a perfect understanding. No questions, no concerns, no doubts anymore. We'll just understand. It'll make sense to us. And because we have that eternal perspective too, we know that was like a blip in time, that's not the end of the story. And so, gosh, I don't know. It's suicide and depression and mental health is such a hard topic. And there's so many unknowns. But I think the one thing that we can hold tight to is that the Lord's there for us. And even if he doesn't stop us or send someone to stop us in order to save our life, he still can work everything to our good. He can let us have that agency and love us exactly the way that we are, and be able to let our story be the thing that helps other people to find light and to find him.
Yeah.
So,
you've heard people say that this mortal life is like a blink of the eye, but it doesn't always feel like it.
It doesn't feel like it.
No.
It's a slow blink.
You're right. It feels a little long sometimes.
It is a slow.
So let's kind of maybe end on a more positive note. You've had a lot of bad things happen to you, but how do you try to find gratitude?
Oh, absolutely.
In your life?
Oh, absolutely. That's one thing that I throughout my life, I look back and I can see the hand of God in my life. I always, my desire to get into farming, the chances of me getting back in that were slim to none. But it was through the hand of God that guided and directed that affair. And so I'm eternally grateful for that. That's one thing I do not understand. I don't know. I don't believe that God intended for Leslie and I to divorce, but I do believe that he brought Denise into my life. She's been an enormous blessing in my life. And, she's very thoughtful. She treats, my children and grandchildren as though they were her own. She's very, very thoughtful. Mm-hmm. So she, that I think, had God not been mindful of me, my life could be not very good, or I could not even be here.
Right.
But, I have much to still be grateful for, which I try to be every day of my life. I even thank the Lord for the hairs of my head, what's left up there. Scott, you're about worse than me.
Scott will just thank him for
Yeah.
the hair on his face.
Yeah. That's part of your head. That's part
Lots
of
of
your head.
blessing. Okay, that's fair. I can do that.
No, anyway. I consider you two friends. I really do. You know, I haven't met you yet, Scott, but I hope to someday. But Alicia, you know, met
Sure.
you,
Yeah.
and so you
Yeah,
know, you
for
both are, I consider you friends.
Well, we love you, Eldon, and you know, you're welcome to come back anytime. But next time, let's come with
Thank you. Better story, huh?
just something amazing and happy and great.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
we'll do that. Oh,
that sounds like a plan.
yeah. All right.
Yeah, we think of you as a friend too, Eldon, and
No.
we really appreciate you coming
Thank
on
you.
and sharing your
Like
story.
I said, I think both of you are to be complimented for the work you're doing. You know, who knows how many countless lives that these stories have touched people and helped people. So I hope that, you know, what I've shared this time and my other times and maybe help someone.
I already know that they have, and they'll continue to do so. So, yeah. All right, Mr. Buchanan. Well, thank you again for joining us, for sharing your story, and thank you to our guests too for tuning in to another episode of Latter-day Lights. Guys, make sure that you do your 5-second missionary work. You have no idea who needs to hear the things that were spoken about today, who needs to have a little bit more light in their life. So just click that share button, like, comment, do whatever you can. Let Eldon know what what part of his story really meant the most to you or stood out to you the most. And as always, if you guys have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who has a great story, we would love to hear it. So reach out to us. You guys can email us at latterdaylights@gmail.com, or you can head to our website, latterdaylights.com, and fill out the contact form at the bottom of the page.
Thanks again, Eldon, and thanks for everyone tuning in, and we will talk to you next week with another episode. Till then, take care.
Thank you so much.